all protocols observed. It is a very interesting meeting today in terms of the issues that have been raised. For the part that we're going to look at, it is looking at African traditional medicines and its contribution to the fight against COVID-19. And it is based on history. It has been passed on from generation to generation. And the postulate that is put across is that it's able to tackle even the most latest crisis using that framework of knowledge. So I think that too is important to pick up Sarah's point about the place of history. Then Professor Swart has also looked at the contradictions in the knowledge generation. And in this particular case, the victims over the centuries have been indigenous communities from who have lost their knowledges into the modern science. And most, as Professor Masabisa, I'm sure is going to demonstrate, that most of these modern medicines have been based on genetic resources and traditional knowledge. The significance of the observation by Professor Swart is the fact that in the South African context, the approach taken is how do we bring in ordinary people with their own knowledge into the modern sector. And so what the colleagues have done is to build up institutional capabilities to support the interaction between the scientists and indigenous communities. And I've known these scholars here, for most of them, over 15 years, and for Professor Neva for over 20 years working in this field. So they are committed people to transformation. And what they will share here is rooted into their struggles to bring African traditional medicines from the margins to the center. And I think they have arrived at the moment. The last point I wanted to raise is that of beneficiation. Just a few weeks ago, 25th and 26th of January, the executive board of the World Health Organization were considering the importance of benefit sharing from the pathogens that are found in developing countries. And the world is divided. The developed world wants to continue to obtain this knowledge and the pathogens for free in the name of being distributed to the rest of the world. But we do not get vaccines for free. We have to pay for them. So this inequity is contested. And for South Africa, we have put a legislation in place to put an end to it so that biopiracy is brought to an end. So my colleagues that are speaking on the panel, we have three of them. The fourth one has dropped out. Will speak into the role of African traditional medicine from being a Cinderella focus into the center, but also pushing the extremes of excellence and relevance for the benefit of the indigenous communities and the society at large. So I would want to introduce Dr. Chabalala, who has been leading the policy and development. He will be the first one to speak. And then there will be Professor Masabisa, who has been in these trenches promoting African traditional medicine, and Professor Neba as well in the same issues. So I hand over to Dr. Shabalala.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sileti. And I'll also like to thank Minister and DG for affording us the opportunity to share our work. And what I will do in terms of my presentation is just to quickly share the framework within which we do our work within the Department of Science and Innovation. I trust you can see my slides. Within the department, we 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, following one of the meetings that we had with our portfolio committee, we were encouraged to come up with a platform. But the platform grew up to be an indigenous knowledge-based bioinnovation program with 6 platforms on medicines, cosmeceuticals, nutraceuticals. Of course, today, we're focusing only on the natural medicines platform. The platform so far is headed by Professor Matsavisa, who will speak after me at the University of the Free State, but it is made up of universities, science councils, and healers organization, of course, various government departments at various levels, whether national, district, or provincial. Our work is really underscored by the WHO guidelines. So those who always felt that we do mumbo jumbo, our work is really guided by the WHO. And we use transdisciplinarity because wherever indigenous knowledge is concerned, one has to use various knowledge systems. And I must say, as Minister said, that South Africa is providing leadership within the WHO African region, whereby we chair the Regional Expert Committee in African Medicines, and Professor Matsavisa is the chair, but also Professor Galeni is part of that Regional Expert Committee. So this is really the framework within which we work. As I said, is transdisciplinarity. The core of our work is guided by who we are as African people. It's guided by the concept of Ubuntu, in that the base of our work is, of course, African knowledge systems in all its forms. We do integral research and development or discovery, meaning that we use various research methodologies at the same time, trying to decolonize research methodology within the national system of innovation. We do inclusive innovation, meaning that whatever innovations that we come up with, we do this together with the knowledge holders. It's not scientists talking to the knowledge holders, but it's really a consortium of equals, because knowledge is knowledge, regardless of what you have appended before your name. Whenever we find something interesting from the science perspective, we then localize this technology where the knowledge is coming from, and we really organize our knowledge holders and communities into small, medium enterprises, which then get trained through various incubators and accelerators. And we promote conscious commercialization, meaning that with it, there is the principle of green economies and sustainability, since while we're working with the biodiversity. Now, our work needs certain enablers. And in the past 2 years, we managed to establish dedicated units within the Technology Innovation Agency, which then looks into the innovation, the research, development, and innovation funding aspect of our work. And within the IDC, we also have the National Indigenous Products Program, which will then look into manufacturing and SME support, and also looking into the markets for these products. There are other enablers which are very essential, and we are actually at the latter end of setting up a working group within SAPRA, which we trust, with the help of the DG and the Minister, that the Department of Health will really encourage SAPRA to establish a unit dedicated to African medicines. Other countries are doing that. We are the only ones that where we have African medicines at its own home, yet we don't have a unit which is dedicated to policy framework, to evaluation of clinical trials, and registration of these medicines for them to be part of the essential medicines list. We also have a unit which is dedicated to African medicines at the South African Bureau of Standards, which look into the standards from cultivation to good laboratory services, including manufacturing, but now they are really taking on the work of branding our work, and we actually have an Ubuntu-based bioinnovation brand, which will be almost like proudly South African brand, which will go into our products. And also various incubators and accelerators, as I said, like the Innovation Hub, which then help us in terms of the enterprise development training of the knowledge holders in the communities. We do what we do for this. We want to really use the land in a productive manner, but really address the triple challenges, whilst at the same time improving the quality of life of our people. The vision that we have, Minister, is that we feel that it's important that government invest more on indigenous knowledge-based innovation linked to enterprise development. Already these products are out there, already these products are on the market. And us as government, we are the market, the hospitals, the schools, the prisons. There is no way in which we can't find market for these things in our own country, but also internationally. Secondly, we're working on the framework to come up with the African Natural Medicines Institute, but of course there will be other branches like on cosmeceuticals and nutraceuticals and health infusions, because all these products are actually linked to health and wellness. And the long-term vision that we have is that we should then start pulling together some of the pilots that we have in terms of manufacturing. We need to pull this into world-class plant-based industries and manufacturing industries, co-owned by the healers and the communities. Like this is how we're going to reverse poverty in our country. So I will really hand back to Prof so that the two professors then talk more in terms of the research that we're doing using this project.
Professor Masabisa, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sileti. I see that Dr. Amp's presentation is still on, but also I think Minister and Deputy Minister, Dr. Kalua, DG and the DDGs, panelists, and the participants. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. What I want to share with you, I don't know whether we can remove Dr. Chabalala's screen and then maybe project what I want to talk about. Well, what I want to say is, we know the importance of vaccines and how they have played key roles in the disease prevention, including also how they have played, I think, key roles in the eradication of diseases. But also what is important is these vaccines start somewhere. And we know that most of the vaccines, I don't know whether I can share my screen, Professor Sileti, these vaccines start somewhere. And some of those vaccines, they start from plant. These are plant-based vaccines. And therefore, we should in fact begin to say, how then could we utilize, I think, the plant knowledge that we have. But also more importantly, what I want to share is really the equity in research. That in medicine, we know that not one single, I think, therapeutic would be effective for a particular disease. We are seeing that a lot of, I think, interventions are put in place to fight just one common disease. And therefore, we want then, I think, to say to government that instead of focusing too much effort again on one aspect of vaccine development, which may have its own challenges, we should in fact have an equitable, I think, distribution of resources towards the development of other therapeutics. What I want to then share with you is then today to really talk about and say, how then do plants, I think, contribute, to COVID? But I will use, in fact, the phases of the COVID, disease to indicate, I think, where the challenges are and where we could play a role, and then talk about the research that we do in terms of plugging into such, research. COVID, to me, is not a single, I think, disease, but it could look like a syndrome. There are many other symptoms that are related to COVID, and they all come at different times. So now this is what I'm showing you, the phases of, I think, the disease, COVID, where you'd actually start off with your viral replication, and then thereafter you have your immune, I think, host inflammatory responses, your cytokine responses, and here different therapeutics and different drugs work differently. Vaccines would be starting right at the beginning, in the end, where in fact you are trying to prevent, the infection. But we see, in fact, at the bottom here that all your antiviral drugs, do actually only work at the beginning of the disease. Once the disease progresses, those drugs are ineffective. They do not work. So therefore, you need another intervention as the disease progresses. And sadly, you see that, in fact, at the height of the disease, where you are looking at a phase, a sort of a 3 disease, where you have severe pneumonia, where the disease severity is at the highest, those antivirals will not work. And therefore, what could be, I think, the solution? The solution, for instance, we heard that you started using up your dexamethasone, which are your immune suppressions. And some of these immune suppressions, in fact, do come from plants. And therefore, if you were to look at your immune modulation and your vitamin C's, which are all your antioxidants that you could actually find from plants, your aspirin, in fact, comes from umnunube, your wild willow tree. These are the interventions that we actually see could in fact contribute right through the phases of COVID. So what then do we say? We look at, in fact, and say plant-based therapies could contribute at the disease phase, and also more importantly, at one aspect that we never talked about, which is your post-COVID syndrome. People suffer most after the disease, and these are the people that have been neglected and they suffer in silence. So we believe that, I think, developing plant-based therapies could in fact even cover your post-COVID, syndrome. What do we know about plants? These are polypharmacy. That means you have many chemicals that will be working in synergy. We call them phytopharmaceuticals, or they have multi-pharmacological activities. And we know that plants have actually developed drugs for coughs, for fevers, for antivirals, anti-inflammatory, immunomodulatory, antidiarrheal, antioxidants, and anticoagulants through your coumarins. And therefore, we could believe that what I've shown you in the earlier slide, that in fact, plants could play a role in the prevention, prophylaxis, or in the curative, and also in the mitigation of the symptoms of COVID. As a part of, I think, the DSI, platform on natural products, which is composed of many institutions, we looked at a number of plants that have been claimed or that have literature, on some of those conditions that I've mentioned. And then we also looked at single plants and also mixtures of plants. And one mixture of interest, which has been developed through the University of the Free State and the platform, was a mixture that composed of 4 plants. And historically, this mixture has been used for HIV. It's being repurposed for, I think, COVID. And it started off way, way back in history, where it was used for a disease called Muyaga. And Muyaga is one of those diseases where people died very slowly, and it had bedridden patients, but I mean, we will not go through that. So what we then did was to look at the preclinical safety and efficacy. We did a toxicology studies with the MRC on the monkeys. We did a number of, I think, reversal studies where we induced, I think, immune deficiency using dexamethasone, using, I think, a whole lot of drugs. And we saw that, in fact, this product does reinstate or reconstitute your immune system. But it is very interesting that we now see that, in fact, the same product, when you test it against the SARS, virus, it is very potent, with, I think, effect in microgram, quantities. And it is based on this that we wanted then to move this product to a clinical trial, because we have done all our phase 1 safety studies, clinical trial, we have done the toxicology, we have done the drug-HEP interaction studies. So all the basic studies were done to put this product as a first in human study. So we repurposed, I think, PILA, for a multi-center open label randomized control study for COVID. And we are now looking at a phase 2 clinical trial. And this is the work that's been supported by DSI. And it's in conjunction with FAMOS, our clinical trial center at the University of the Free State. And ideally, this, I think, study is really looking at a 3-arm study where you have your standard of care, and then you also then have your PILA, plus your standard of care, which is 1 arm. And then the 3rd arm, we wanted to do a comparative with another drug, but we thought we could use one of the Chinese products. And then we looked at sort of the measurement outcomes, and the study would last for about 30 days. So ideally, we are now looking at recruiting about 500 patients, and we have identified 3 study sites. One study site is in Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. The other study site is in Kimberley in the Northern Cape, while the 3rd one is in Vereeniging in Gauteng. And all these study sites, in fact, are equipped to handle COVID studies. And all these study sites have got personnel that have experience in the conduct of clinical trials. We're looking at a budget of about 33 million rand for that, because it is very expensive to do clinical trial on studies. But this is where we are to say, at least we know that traditional or natural products could in fact contribute to the fight against COVID. But we realize that there's something risky that our government is doing. You are always told never put your your eggs in one basket. And to me, this is exactly what we're doing. We have heard the challenges, about, the vaccines. They were expedited in terms of their development, because of the emergency that we have. Their safety is not well established. Their efficacy, again, is not well established. So why are we putting all that effort and the R&D in one basket? And while we know that in medicine, no one intervention will in fact treat or eradicate, the disease. So challenges of vaccines, yes, drug variants, drug resistance, but again, putting your eggs in one basket stifles up innovation. It stifles up your local research and development, because we are focusing on one intervention. When that fails, we have to start from scratch. We need to learn from our past. And what do I mean by that? I'll show you that once, we have learned from our past, we had all these other plagues with all those diseases, and in most of them, in fact, there were no vaccines. The bubonic plague, it was eradicated simply because of, I think, people who were quarantined. Don't go out, stay in your house, and that's how they got rid of the bubonic plagues. Some of the vaccines are very good for bacterial infections. I've never had, any successful development of a viral vaccine. Similarly, we did the same mistake for HIV. Much emphasis and much investment was put on HIV vaccine. We still do not have an HIV vaccine now. Really, my message, Minister, is let us begin to look at all the open avenues. Let's begin to be open-minded when we do our research, and then look at all the possibilities that will be there. That's what I mean by saying we should learn from our past, that things don't just go one way, but we need to have many other interventions. So we need to also to believe in our science. We need to also to believe in ourselves, that many of the drugs that we have, many of even your AZT comes from natural products, So therefore, I think, we want to put in a very strong, I think, motivation that we need more investment into our natural medicines and our natural, products. How then could natural products, I'm now concluding.
Professor Masavisa.
Yes, this is the last one.
Part of it.
So therefore, we believe that I think natural products would contribute, as it contributed in the past pandemics, it would still contribute in this pandemic. It would contribute as a prophylactic, as a preventative, it would contribute as a curative, and it would also contribute as a restorative. All we want to ask is, let us give traditional medicines a fair chance, a fair investment, so that it contributes into, I think, all the pandemics. Professor Sileti, thank you so much. I will not acknowledge anybody, but this is part of, I think, a consortium, and this is work supported by DSI. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well put. And Professor Kaleni.
Good afternoon, Minister, Deputy Minister, DG, and all protocol observed. I will start by saying we got the marching orders from the minister when he announced the department is going to be funding the research into African medicines in the fight against the virus. What we then follow was, in a sense, what Professor Matsabisa said, is a repurposing of South African indigenous plants against COVID-19. We looked at plants that are known through indigenous knowledge that are used for respiratory and viral infections. And we had then to produce laboratory quantities of these extracts for testing. In this case, we are reporting in vitro evaluation and for efficacy as a start. And using cell-free screens to look at whether such would disrupt the ability of the virus to bind to the host H2 receptor, which has been described. And then for those that are successful, we look at the IC50s, and then to look at the actual antiviral activity. This is just a model to demonstrate how we're using to see how the plants would interrupt the binding of the virus to the ACE inhibitor. Of course, now that we can culture the virus, we can grow the virus, and so we're able to then test if it does work against. And so here I'm just reporting on the successes. So we've seen some of the plants. We're not referring to the names here. There's a danger. Some people went to harvest even the roots of some plants in the wild after hearing some reports. So here, these are the successful extracts. Of course, we use, if we see that there is specific activity around inhibition, we then test to see whether this is specific, such that we know that it's not something that's random. And we can see that the selectivity index that we can generate, it's up to about 5 for some of the extracts, about 2 for some. We also used a plant, a mixture, a herbal mixture that we were working with, which we're evaluating for HIV, but we then say, can we see how it works? And lo and behold, the selectivity index can rise up to 116, which is very, very exciting to see. And then we've looked at anti-SARS-CoV itself. Firstly, that we were happy that these are not toxic, cytotoxic to the cells that have the virus. And we can generate up to 70% inhibition of the virus at the stage for those cell lines. And we can look at, actually, this is a dose. It's a dose. It's like as you reduce the dose, the antiviral properties drop. So up to about 25 micrograms, about 12.5 micrograms for some of these extracts. So I think we see that we have something that's promising for this product. One of these herbs, we had actually seen on animal studies that they are much safe, up to 2,000 milligrams had been given with no observable clinical changes and no significant hematology could be observed. So these are the first reports of our indigenous plants that are working in vitro at the moment against SARS-CoV, but they also inhibit the viral entry. What one is not mentioned here that Professor Matshabisa said, some of these plants, of course, are immunomodulating. So there's the research and data that is already there. So we are now looking at further developing these products to look at to the stage where we can test for their efficacy on humans. And we are, as Professor Matseba said, we are a consortium, a range of institutions participate in this, and we want to say thank you to the department for funding this research. Thanks very much.